Hello, welcome friends to another edition of Horn of Africa TV Conversations. I am your host, Elias Amare, and today I'm very happy and glad to have with me an Ethiopian scholar, Dr. Endalk Chala. He's assistant professor of media communications at Hamlin University. Welcome to the show, Dr. Endalk. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Elias. Thank you for having me.
Great. So today we will be discussing on the huge deluge of disinformations, distortions on the media, war by media, some call it, or psychological warfare, hybrid war, what have you, on the conflict raging in Ethiopia, in particular in the Tigray region by the TPLF against Ethiopian forces. By way of kickstarting, I will give you a few words to say about your background in your education in Ethiopia and here in the United States and your research area of interest, Dr. Endalk.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes. Yes, I was born and raised in Ethiopia. I did my bachelor's degree in English language at Dilla University a while ago. I did my master's at Addis Ababa University School of Journalism and Communication, and I did my PhD at University of Oregon. My research interest is in communication, journalism, activism, new technology, and sub-Saharan African countries, but particularly in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa. So I have written about misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, and the technology, how technology kind of being used for this misinformation, disinformation in the context of Ethiopia.
Very interesting, and that's what exactly we need your expertise today. Just for my curiosity, when you say new technology in Africa, what are you implying? The advent of this social media, the revolution in communications technology, and how that impacts Africa? Is that what?
Yes. So yes, that's what I'm trying to study. So African society, particularly Ethiopia. We have been 3 decades of TPLF rule, sometimes misrule, corruption, and then there is an intersection of technology and TPLF rule or misrule. I would rather say it misrule. So TPLF kind of executed this new media communication, particularly social media, for propaganda. People are talking about misinformation, disinformation right after the conflict. But TPLF has been executing misinformation, disinformation using these social media platforms, once by way of blocking internet, another time by spreading narratives that fits their agenda using social media, particularly Facebook. Facebook was one of those bigger platforms with bigger population use in Ethiopia. So people are talking about misinformation, disinformation only recently, like a year or 2 years. But misinformation, disinformation has been in the DNA of TPLF, and this technology has been used by TPLF to spread narratives in the form of propaganda or misinformation that fits their agenda. So when I'm talking about technology, I'm talking about social media platforms. Yes.
That aspect of it. Yes, indeed. I remember very well during the protests beginning in 2014, some 7 years ago, that started in Ginchi, I think, and then spread all over the Oromia region, and then from there all over Ethiopia to the Amhara and other regions. And so both the activists against the regime, the TPLF minority regime, as well as the regime itself, at that time TPLF was in power, were quite adept at using social media. But as you said, the TPLF regime, in particular its propaganda guru, Barakat Simon, as well as Getachew Redda, were quite adept or expert at manipulating the media, the new social media, to disseminate disinformation, divisions, and what have you. So yes, that's quite interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that, because when we talk about disinformation of the TPLF, it didn't start now. It had a long background and expertise in this.
It's, as a matter of fact, in 2014, the current Director General of WHO, in 2014, in 2013, he was a foreign minister of Ethiopia.
Exactly.
And
you're talking about Dr. Tedros Adhanom,
yes,
WHO Director General.
Yes. So he was the one who started like this big propaganda campaign using social media. They are the ones who've introduced this technology. I mean, technology by me, I'm saying that this propaganda and misinformation, using technology is the one. He came up with a big follower, and he purchased, I still have the data. He purchased a lot of followers. He put up, ads about his engagement, and he was campaigning, running here and there to be nominated for candidates.
For the WHO, yes, I very well remember that.
Yes, so he purchased a lot of ads on Facebook, and he started to generate in his followers, and of course, TPLF members also, who are paid a lot of money. And there is still a data to support this. It's an evidence-rich argument that I am trying to make here, that there were a lot of TPLF cadres, and people were used to call them like cadres. They were,
but these were cyber warriors or cyber
warriors. So they made a lot of money out of this. They introduced like Ethiopia's developing terrorists. For example, the Oromo Liberation Front members who were described as terrorists by TPLF in 2014, 15, 16, and even Getachew himself have been labeling them as terrorists who have never done anything for the Oromo nation. So I remember those times. The context was that trying to introduce these narratives, this false information, and labeling others as enemies were the ones that have started the current misinformation. The current misinformation, of course, is like the intensity is different, and it's picked up by the global corporate media. But by then, there was no global corporate media reporting on those misinformation. But the misinformation was starting from 2014, 2015, introduced by TPLF. And there, of course, there is a lot of information out there. But researchers and journalists are not like good enough. They don't research. But there is a lot of information out there how TPLF has used, social media
and abused the social media and
social media. Yes.
Great. So, by way of kickstarting our conversation, then to the present, we fast forward to the present. You recently posted on Twitter. You're active on Twitter. On November 5, to be exact, where you said, and I quote you, "Any critical media studies scholar who wants to study journalistic fiascos, take note. There is one unfolding in covering the conflict in Ethiopia. When this is over and done with, I am afraid there will be no credibility left for foreign correspondents in Ethiopia." So what do you mean by this? That this period right now is an area of interest for those in media studies to investigate. You feel that years from now, we will be studying what is unfolding right in front of our eyes today?
Yes. So what I was trying to say is like, from the start of this conflict, the conflict started November 3, 2020. So that is like the mainstream narration of how this conflict had started. So I have been keeping a data of how these different newspapers like New York Times, TV stations like CNN and the BBC, and other Western corporate media, including Al Jazeera, had been reporting about this conflict. It is very sad that they either are not interested to look at the truth or not look at the facts and how this started. And they just picked up. As I said, TPLF has been really adept, as you have said, in misinforming the public. They have been misleading the Ethiopian public for many years, misinforming the Ethiopian public for many years. But as the conflict started and getting intensified, the TPLF activists had kind of misled or deliberately some kind of corporate media also kind of wanted and keep their eyes away from the facts. So that is why I say that they have never reported, and I haven't come across with any reports that really constitute the true nuances of the conflict, how this conflict had unfolded, what led to this conflict, who is the culprit, who started the conflict, like who triggered the conflict, for example. So, for example, in a typical New York Times or CNN reporting, it goes like, Dr. Abiy Ahmed sent his troops to remove the regional government of Tigray in November 2020. That was like a typical narration that you see from New York Times, from Washington Post, from CNN. But the fact is,
across the board,
across the board,
BBC, what have you, it is as if a script had been given to them to disseminate that line, that disinformation, yes, which is nothing but disinformation, actually.
Yes, and the fact of the matter is that TPLF members, when the conflict started last year in November, and even this year, just 3 weeks ago, one of their top generals, General Tzadkan Tensai, he came and he said that we started it. Yes, we did it, and we took a preemptive strike. And he has said it just 3 weeks ago, and they have been saying it, and they have been honest on their part, at least. We are the one who took the conflict, and we are the one who triggers the conflict. And the corporate media is not willing to report that. And they always keep this line that the TPLF, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent his troops to remove the regional government, which is absolutely.
So let's unpack that disinformation or lie. What exactly happened on the night of November 3, November 4? What is it that triggered the war?
So the first thing,
put the record straight.
Yes, to put the record straight, I'm glad that you have asked me. They are the one who started the conflict. They attacked the Northern Command, Ethiopian National Defense Force. They have killed soldiers. And of course, I have seen on Twitter people debating how many soldiers did they kill? How many, I know people kind of try to muddy the argument by asking, do you have the evidence? How many people were killed? How many weapons that they have stolen from the Northern Command? So yes, they have stolen weaponry, modern weaponry, and they have killed soldiers. And I have seen a report that they also kind of poisoned the generals. And you know what I have heard about that? They also made the soldiers to make a hay during the daytime because there was there was infestation that coming.
Locusts.
Yes, the locust infestation, and the military members were trying to help make a hay and trying to help the farmers, and they have spent the entire day working alongside the Tigrayan farmers. And when they get back to sleep in the middle of the night, they attacked them, they killed them, and that was what triggered the conflict. At least the immediate cause of the conflict was that daybreak attack in the middle of the night on their own soldiers. So non-Tigrayan soldiers, Amharas, Oromos, other Ethiopians have been killed, assassinated, captured, paraded, and then
in a humiliating way, yes.
In a humiliating way, then what do you do if you are a government of that country? What do you do? How do you defend that kind of attack?
Mm-hmm.
So that
Indeed,
was
by any measure of legality, this is an act of treason, right?
an act of treason.
For a province or a regional state to attack the federal army based in that region.
Yes.
By way of comparison, we can say if in the state of Alabama here in the United States, the federal troops had a garrison or a base there, and the state militia decides to attack that base, that federal army base, and kill thousands of soldiers, capture their weaponry and so on. What
Yes.
would the federal government in Washington, D.C. do? That's the kind of analogy we're talking here, right?
Yes. Thank you so much for a very good metaphor. So people do not understand this. This is a fact. This has to be established. And they are the ones who have admitted this, doing it on TV, not one time. 2 times, 3 times they have admitted this.
Yeah, several officials, as you said, for example, on November 13, the member of the leadership, Secretary Getachew, who's in charge of propaganda, came out on TV, in Tigray TV, and openly said, yes, we took a preemptive lightning attack and captured the strategic weaponry because it was important for us to do so. So
yes,
they have not denied this.
የትግራይ ህዝብ ግልጽ የሆነ አደጋ ላይ መግባቱን በመገምገም ከውስጥም ከውጭም ከላይም ደግሞ በኢሳያስ አፈወርቂ በሁሉም አቅጣጫ
We came to the conclusion that the people of Tigray were in clear danger, and coupled with our realization that the conspiracy to crush Tigray from the south, from within, and from the north by Isaias Afwerki was reaching a critical point, we had to take swift action. This is why we worked with members of the Northern Command who were willing to collaborate with us and used force to overpower those who were not willing to work with us in an effort to destabilize or demobilize them. The operation we undertook was a very quick one. Within 45 minutes, we were able to bring under our control the entire Northern Command, except for a few pockets of resistance here and there. The measures taken were in accordance with the internationally accepted concept of anticipatory self-defense. The basic principle of this concept allows small countries who believe that they are facing an imminent and clear attack from a larger power to launch a preemptive attack. This mechanism allows these smaller countries, when they believe that they will be crushed and destroyed, to launch a swift lightning attack on the larger force to cause disarray in the invading force and thwart the attack. This taking action before being attacked is referred to as anticipatory self-defense. It is a mechanism that gives you the right to launch a preemptive strike when you feel that you are facing certain attack. In Tigray, there was an Ethiopian army of 30,000, where Tigrayans constituted a major part of the chain of command of this force. When you have unitary forces intending to invade you from the south, and from the north you have Isaias Afwerki, and when these forces are planning a war on the people of Tigray, should the people just sit with folded arms and wait? No, they shouldn't. It was because of this that a lightning strike had to be carried out. If the lightning strike had not been taken, today Tigray would not be a region where we can sit here and discuss these things. Multitudes would have been killed, and there would have been a great deal of destruction. As stated, the dictatorial dream of Abiy would have been fulfilled, albeit temporarily. The Northern Command had about 70 to 80% of the military hardware, including the heavy artillery weapons and the firepower of the entire Ethiopian army. This strong Northern Command was destroyed by incorporating its existing members who wanted to join us peacefully. Our intention was to commandeer the weapons and firepower of the Northern Command for the benefit of the Tigray people. This was the first phase of the action, but things have moved on beyond that. They had worked the invading force into a frenzy by telling them that the Ethiopian army had been stabbed in the back and was told that now is a good opportunity to regain the land that it had lost to the TPLF. The invading force had been mobilized while in a state of shock, as there were some pockets of the northern command that had not yet been subdued. The army of Tigray firstly defended against an invading force from the south. Secondly, it carried out a mop-up operation in the Tigray region where, either through negotiations or the use of force, it had disarmed the pockets of the Ethiopian Northern Command that were still armed.
Yes, they have not denied it, and Tzadkan had said it 2 times, not only 1 time. He did it. I think he said it in April or in March. Now he said it a couple of weeks ago, and the corporate media are not willing to listen. And I think there are reasons that are given for this. There is linguistic barriers. They say when you report on Ethiopia, Ethiopians always communicate with their language, and there is a linguistic barrier. So what will you do? We don't report on. So one of the challenges, you have to learn the language. You have to learn. We have to hire translators, ask someone. And I have seen.
So let's check on that, on linguistic barriers.
Yes.
Do you think the Ethiopian government, the central government, the federal government, is only talking in Ethiopian national language? Don't they have a press, a very proficient, professional press unit of the Office of the Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed Ali? He has a young lady there by the name of Lena Suyum, who oftentimes comes out, tweets in English, does interviews with Western mainstream media such as BBC, CNN. Recently, she did in English. Her English is quite good, excellent, I must say. A very good communicator. So when they say that there's a language barrier, do you accept that as...
So one of the reasons they give you is always that there is a linguistic barrier, cultural barrier, and the environment is not conducive for free expression and for journalism. But that was an outright lie. And they have been reporting when there was repressive policies in place in Ethiopia in 2014-15 when TPLF was ruling the country. And it's much better now. You can go and report. There is always a problem when you try to report when you go to foreign land. And if you don't know the language, the culture, the history, the context, yes, it's a challenge, but it's part of the deal. It's part of your job requirement. If you are a foreign correspondent, you have to learn the language, the history, and the context. It's very important. The nuance is very important. So what they're trying to do is they just don't want to listen. They have their own way of looking at the problem. One thing, of course, is the bigger picture is racism for me. It's a far, far away place. It's Africa. Who cares if you report, negligently?
The dark continent or all sorts of horrible things happen.
Yes.
There's that racist context.
Yes. So, that one thing is that one. That I have seen a lot of that kind of thing. The second thing is I think TPLF also, as I said, is adept and they know how to kind of inject narratives that fits their agenda. Those narratives, they call them narratives, but misinformations and propaganda. Narratives are like propaganda. That is what the TPLF has been doing. And as I said, they have been doing that for 30 years, for 3 decades. And now they have intensified and technology helped them. And they have also, another factor is that, most of these foreign correspondents, people who are hired at these NGOs and stuff, they have been foreign correspondents in Ethiopia when TPLF was on power. And there were questionable relationships with those TPLF officials. I know there are informal relationships that was formed with these foreign correspondents in Addis and the TPLF officials when TPLF was in power. I know how they corrupt people.
Very cozy relationships.
Yes.
I can say, for example, without a doubt, and I have, oftentimes doing it on Twitter, challenging this this guy now who passes as an expert at the International Crisis Group, William Davison. He used to cover Ethiopia for, I think, Bloomberg News and then sometimes Guardian way back in 2015 when he was a rookie journalist. And at that time, his relationship with the TPLF officials, such as the HoA director now, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, and other TPLF operatives, was very cozy. I remember very well at that time when he was doing the coverage for Bloomberg News. You remember the Irecha massacre?
Yes.
Where, the Oromo cultural celebration at Bishoftu.
Yes.
And, hundreds of people died. And he came out and said, no, there was no guns fired, no bullets fired. And, it was all by stampede. And he kind of minimized the number of deaths. They reached up to, 100, 700, if I'm not mistaken, if not 1,000.
Yes. I'm really impressed that you have remembered that.
I remember very well.
Yes. And you know that during those times, those foreign correspondents were only reporting about the development of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is growing, the economy is really well going for everybody and stuff like that. So they only shifted the narratives and the narrative frames when TPLF gets out of power. So you can see that this narrative frames and politics has played a role in spoiling journalism. So journalism really, that's why when I wrote that tweet, that credibility, this is not like, for example, especially over the last few days, when I tweet that, CNN had reported that the rebels are encircling the capital and they will be moving in to the capital in the next few hours or in the next few days. Now, how many days?
Yes, almost 10 days ago or
10 days ago.
Right, November 5, around the time you posted that tweet.
Yes. And
the rebels were literally knocking at the gates of Addis and people are fleeing the capital and what have you. Yes.
And I called my family. My family lives in the capital and of course in the outskirts of the capital too. And I called, what is going on? And they said, what is going on? They asked me, did you see any rebel? We haven't seen anything. And I can definitely tell you, people on Twitter kind of joking when they say, why are we lying? Why are we CNNing me? Or what CNN is like equivalent with lie. And people have started to say, when the former president said that, CNN is fake news, I was really angry. How do you dare to say CNN fake news with this number of credibility? With
an established media outlet that has been there for decades and so on and so forth.
Yes. Now people have said that, I'm telling you, very real progressive people, like liberal people who say that, okay, now I get it. Now I get why the former president says CNN is fake news. Maybe he may deploy that term to attack CNN in his own context, with his own nuances. But now I understand why he is so upset with CNN, because this is not just making up things. In Ethiopia, they're not even making up things. They are, they're not, they're not trying to have like a grain of truth and exaggerate, but that's not what happened.
It's like 100% falsehood.
100% of falsehood. They just made up, and that makes really, really bad. And I don't know how CNN will get the credibility back within at least Ethiopian community, because people are really upset with that kind of report.
In fact, after that reportage of CNN with TPLF rebels knocking at the gates of Addis just in the suburbs, a few days later, then there was a massive rally in Addis Ababa, the capital city,
yes,
to protest this. Tell us what were the residents of the capital city protesting against. Part of the banners, a lot of them were holding CNN, Stop BBC. Lying, BBC, Stop Lying, and so on and so forth.
Yes. So those are like I have seen a lot of memes on Twitter. And the funny thing is that they haven't covered that. They haven't covered that. There is no single report from CNN that like massive number of people. I don't know the number because, people exaggerate numbers always, but there massive number of people came and protested CNN because CNN lied about it. And, when I took a lot of courses in political economy, corporate media, when I was a grad school at University of Oregon, and I read manufacturing consent.
Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman's famous book.
And I was like, I understand, but they are like too cynical. I was saying when I read that is too cynical. How do you manufacture consent? Now CNN is trying to manufacture consent, but they also want to manufacture crisis in Ethiopia. They manufacture crisis, and then out of that crisis, they want to manufacture consent. They are trying to ask for the State Department to militarily intervene. And then over the last few days, there is a lot of like really, really shocking reports that the United States is ready to intervene. There is a BBC headline that kind of gives you a shock that, okay, United States is coming to be involved militarily in Ethiopia. That is like, you can kind of see some kind of coordinated campaign to terrorize and to manipulate other public and to terrorize Ethiopians. And that is what I felt. And
this is outright, or bordering on psychological warfare.
It is.
What would be called hybrid war, yeah?
Yes, that is part of their war strategy. So you can create some kind of tension within the Ethiopian community. So, and the embassy is also kind of released travel advisories, and citizens of the United States are advised, they say, I will quote, to leave while the commercial flights are available. That was shocking for me. And I've seen people are flying back to Ethiopia. I have family, and I have said, what is going on? And they said, no, there is no such a thing concerning that. There is a tension you can see, but people going their life as usual they do. So I have heard that people are being advised not, to go to the to Addis because the crisis is fluid. And that was so, and as I said, manufacturing consent, and they kind of work hand in hand. I can see that there is some group of people who are trying to terrorize, open some kind of psychological warfare against Ethiopians. And of course, there is also this strategy to make you feel embarrassed that if you say something against this, and they will label you that you are an automatically, the government cadre or supporter of Abiy or something.
Regime apologist
regime apologist. And it's not about being a regime apologist. It's not about being, if you oppose a regime, you have a right to do that. But this is not about the regime. This is about Ethiopian people who want to live their life peacefully. Why do you terrorize them by manufacturing crisis, by telling lies, literally?
And for us as media practitioners, of course, to defend the truth versus lies, yeah?
Yes, and I haven't seen, and they selective, of course. I also say that, a couple of weeks ago, I was invited to give my opinion about misinformation in Ethiopian conflict on Al Jazeera, a show called Listening Post. I was invited, and the producers interviewed me, and I gave him my opinion about the misinformation. And the corporate media had played a huge role in spreading misinformation. And they selectively denied my voice, and they didn't broadcast my voice. And luckily, I have recorded my interview, my response, and I have still my email exchange with them. But I'm not complaining. It's their platform. They can choose whatever they want to present. But you can tell that people are selectively removed,
excluded from the discourse, and thus there is a huge imbalance in the coverage.
The huge imbalance, and that is what makes me sad. And they're talking about diversity, inclusivity, and diversity of opinion. That is not acceptable. That is a lie. There is no diversity of opinion. And there is like panels after panels that no Ethiopian scholar was invited. Mm-hmm. For that matter, even Eritrean scholars. Eritrean scholars shunned, I'm telling you, shunned from this kind of panels. And they are talking about diversity of opinion. If they are not afraid of diversity of opinion, if they are about inclusivity, why don't they invite Eritrean scholars to talk about Eritrea? Why don't they invite Ethiopian scholars? There are multiple of them that I know in America, in Europe, in Africa as well. So I haven't seen any panel that has opened a slot for Ethiopian voices. Yes, there are, of course, people, what I would say, that white men who say that are expert on Ethiopia are being invited, and Ethiopians who have lived experience, who have scholarly experience, who know the language, who know the context, were shunned out of these panels. And now they are talking about diversity of opinion.
In one tweet in this regard, you quoted a famous anthropologist. His name escapes me now, but yes, you were saying the hegemonic discourse of Eurocentric view being imposed, where experts are only, white men.
Yes,
and they chastise even Ethiopian scholars when they dare to speak out and tell the truth.
Yes.
Who was that anthropologist that you were quoting?
Yes, Tarnoval. Tarnoval was, I saw there is a tweet executing with an Ethiopian scholar and this Norwegian anthropologist who said,
Kjetil Tronvoll, yes.
Kjetil Tronvoll is, if you don't want to, if you don't want to hurt your credibility,
your career,
kind of terrorizing him. I quoted a famous scholar, Gayatri Spivak. Spivak. She is actually
on the subaltern. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Now I remember. Yeah.
Yes. Can the subaltern speak? So she actually writes that article in the critical of two scholars. One of the scholar Foucault.
Foucault is Michel Foucault, the French.
Yes, so she was critical of him. He was, of course, one of the
the postmodernist,
yes,
philosopher, what have you.
But she kind of became very critical of even those kind of scholars that can the subaltern speak. That article is really a deep critique of how the subaltern, like a scholar of
the subaltern being voices from the global south, right?
The voices from the global intellectuals from the
journalists, writers,
writers systematically excluded from these kind of panels and discussions. I have seen opinion pieces. Today, there is an Ethiopian scholar, Baharu Zode, Professor Baharu Zode, who had written really
historian, well-known Ethiopian historian, yes.
Historian. So no one is willing to publish his take on the conflict on the misinformation on major news outlets. Professor Masai Kabada also had really written a very amazing piece about that conflict, and you don't see that kind of opinion pieces published on New York Times or CNN, because those views will not fit their agenda. Those views do not fit their narrative. And you can see how corporate media works hand in glove with the narratives that fits their agenda, which is a TPLF narrative.
Very well. Now let's go on into a recent tweet by an Ethiopian scholar, a thread actually. The Ethiopian scholar, I think, is a sociologist, Dr. Professor Derese Getachew Kasa. We'll put up the tweet, the thread on screen, in which he says, this is a tweet from the 16th of November, I think today, this information warfare led by TPLF and its Western enablers had many lies deflated. Here is a list, and he goes on and compiles a list of 14 major big lies. The first one is Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, triggered the war. We've dealt with that.
Yes.
It was the TPLF actually that and they confessed to triggering the war, taking preemptive attack, killing many, capturing many, and then firing rocket missiles at Eritrea in order to widen the war, rocket missiles at civilian targets in Bahar Dar and Gondar. This is incontrovertible. And yet the Western media harps on this recently. So that has been deflated or punctured. The second is genocide happened in Tigray. This is another big lie, of course. Can you talk a little bit about this, because it's one of the major narratives that or lies that they constructed immediately upon the start of the war was that Tigray genocide.
Yeah, so they it's funny. People really want to know about this genocide narrative. Genocide narrative was injected not now, not after this conflict. TPLF has in fact injected this genocide narrative not now, at least in 2005. In 2005, opposition leaders were accused, persecuted for perpetuating genocide in 2005, not now, like 15 years ago, 17 years ago.
For the non-Ethiopian international listeners, viewers, what happened in 2005 that Professor Endalk is talking about was that an opposition coalition defeated the TPLF regime in a free and fair election, which was monitored, observed by international observers. And the regime then stalled the election, which it lost outright, imprisoned the opposition politicians, and then charged them with what
yes, with
you're saying, with genocide, yes.
Yes.
እኔ አሁን አንድ ሁሉ ጊዜ የሚገርመኝ ነገር አለ። በሰሞኑን በደንብ ሰምተሽ እንደሆነ ጦርነቱ ከመጀመሩ በፊት ጀምሮ ስለ ጂኖሳይድ ነው የሚያወሩት። ይዘር ማጥፋት ወንጀል እና ይህ የቱ ጋር ነው የዘር ማጥፋት የሆነው ምናምን የሚለውን በዝርዝር መመልከት አይደለም። እኔ ሁሉ ጊዜ ስትራይክ የሚያደርገኝ ስለ ዘር ማጥፋት ህዋቶች የሚያወሩት ዛሬ አይደለም። ህዋቶች ስለ ዘር ማጥፋት ሲያወሩ የነበረው ስልጣናችን ትንሽ እንኳን ተነካ በሚሉ ጊዜ፣ ትንሽ እንኳን ጥያቄ ውስጥ ገባ በሚሉ ጊዜ ምንም ባልተነካ ነገር የሚያወሩት የነበረው ስለ ዘር ማጥፋት ነው። ምርጫ 97 ላይ አይ ዶንት ኖ እንጂ ልጅ ትመስያለሽ ሶ ያን ያልነበርሽ ይሆናል ሶ አይ ዶንት ኖ ምርጫ 97 ላይ ቅንጅት ሲያሸንፋቸው የመጀመሪያ ነገር መለስ እንትን ያደረጉት ይሄ በክርክሮች በመናምን መሸነፍ ሲጀምሩ ኢንተርሃሞ የሚል የትግራይን ህዝብ ለመጨፍጨፍ የተነሳ የዘር አጥፊ ቡድን የመጣብን ብለው ነበር ሲናገሩ የነበረውና እኛ የሰማን ጊዜ ግራ ገብቶን ምንድነው የሚያወሩት እነኚህ ሰዎች? ለምንድነው ይሄንንስ ይሄ አንዳንድ ጊዜ መጥፎ ለምን ይመኛሉ ምናምን የምትይው ነገር አለ አይደል? ለምንድነው ይሄን የሚያደርጉት ምናምን እንል ነበርና ከታሰርን በኋላ በጣም ኢንትረስቲንግ ነበር። ታስረን አንድ የትግራይ ተወላጅ ሆኑ የህወሓት ካድሬ ግን ሽማግሌ ሰውዬ ናቸው። እሳቸው ሆነ ቦታ ላይ ብቻ ከወጣቶቹ ጋር ተደባድበው ነበር መሰለኝ። ኮዙ የጀመረው ነገር ምን እንደሆነ አላውቅም፣ ግን ታጣቂ እንደነበሩ ይታወቃልና ፍርድ ቤት ሲከሱን የዘር ማጥፋት ወንጀል ፈጽመዋል ብለው ነው የከሰሱ። የዘር ማጥፋት ወንጀል መፈጸሙን ለማስረጃነት ያቀረቡት እኚህ ሰው እየተደበደቡ አንድ የትግራይ ሰው ኮዙ ምንም ሆነ ምን ብቻ የተደበደብኩት እኔ የትግሬ ስለሆንኩ ነው ስላሉ ዘርማ እና ይሄ በኋላ ነው በደንብ እየገበኝ ለምንድን ነው እንደዚህ አይነት ነገር የሚመኙት? ለምንድን ነው ይሄን እንትን ስል የተረዳሁት ነገር ይሄ ጂኖሳይድ ተፈጸመብን ብለሽ በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ አንዴ እንትን ካደረግሽና እውነትም ጂኖሳይድ ተፈጽሟል የሚባል ነገር ካለ የሚሰጥሽ የሞራል የበላይነት አለ። ያኔ አሁን ይሄንን ጦርነት አሸንፈው እንደማንም እንትን ቢገቡ ዘር ማጥፋት ተፈጽሞብናልና ኤኒቲንግ ካሁን በኋላ የምናደርገውን ዓለም አቀፍ ማህበረሰቡ ማንም ሊጠይቀን አይችልም። ማንም እንትን ይሄ እስራኤል ውስጥ የምታየው አይነት ወይም ሩዋንዳ ውስጥ የሚደረገው ከዛ በኋላ ይሄ ስለ ሰብአዊ መብት ስለምን እናወራለን የሚለውን ካጋሜን ስለ ሰብአዊ መብት አይጠይቁም። እዛ ብዙ እንትን ወር የእስራኤልና የፍልስጤምን ጉዳይ በሚመለከት የምዕራባውያን ስለ ሰብአዊ መብት ይሄ ጂኖሳይድ ተፈጸመባቸው ራሳቸውን ለመከላከል በቂ እንትን ያላቸው ናቸው የሚለውን ነገር ማግኘት ይፈልጋሉ። የህዋቶች ዋና አሁን የምታየው በነገራችን ላይ ስለ ጂኖሳይድ መውራት የተጀመረው ጦርነት ከተጀመረ በኋላ አይደል። ከመጀመሩ በፊት አሜሪካን ሀገር የጂኖሳይድ ግሩፕ ተብሎ ተቋቁሞ በአጠቃላይ ለሚዲያውና ለእንትን በትግራይ ህዝብ ላይ ጂኖሳይድ ሊፈጸም ነው እያሉ እንትን ያደርጉ ነበር። እና ይህንን ስታይ ቅድም ሲጀምር ያልኩሽን ነገር ነው። ምንም አይነት ለከት የሌላቸው ሰዎች ናቸው። የሞራል ለከት የሚባል ነገር የላቸውም። ልክ ይህንን ካደረጉ በኋላ ደግሞ አሁን ትንሽ የሚያሸንፉ የመሰላቸው ጊዜ ሰሞኑን ደብረጽዮን ሲል የነበረውን ሰምተሽ ከሆነ ጂኖሳይድ ተፈጽሞብናልና አሁን ስናሸንፍና አዲስ አበባ ስንገባ ካሳ የኢትዮጵያ ህዝብ ካሳ ሊከፍለን 30 ዓመት የዘረፉትን ህብረተሰብ ለሚቀጥለው ትልቁ ዝርፊያ ያዘጋጁት ነው። ገና አሁን in the name of genocide እና የኢትዮጵያ ህዝብ መረዳት ያለበት ዲል የምናደርገው አሁን የገጠመን ባላንጣ የሞራል ለከት ያለው ያንን በዛ የሞራል ለከት መዝነሽ ምትዋጊው አይደል።
And I remember when I was in college, when you dare to oppose a TPLF, they will come up with this narrative. They say that you are a sympathizer of genocide. You kind of they kind of want to create a guilty conscience on others that they are somehow are perpetrators of genocide, something like that. So people have
oftentimes they would bring the specter of Rwanda and they would threaten if this happens, this Rwanda type scenario will be unfolding in Ethiopia.
Yes.
And so the two favorite charges for them were terrorism and genocide.
Genocide, yes. So if it's the data is available. You can everyone who wants to understand this genocidal narrative can go and see either a media coverage of it or the legal document of it. I have, there were a lot of opposition groups who were charged with genocide. Not now, like 15 years ago. Now, when the war started, they immediately started accusing
They brought that bogeyman of genocide. In fact, they were prepared, actually. Let's put on the screen an image in which their operatives, their activists outside, immediately upon the start of the war, November 4th, they started to disseminate on Twitter this hashtag Tigray genocide.
Yes.
How is it possible that the war is barely starting, that they launched the war, they ignited the war, and yet they are claiming on that very day that Tigray genocide is happening?
So it's amazing that TPLF also kind of, as you said, is very adept. So it's funny that you see they have switched some narratives in local languages and in international language. For the international language, English and other international languages, they're kind of pandering to the white saviors, we're suffering from genocide, we're victims. But switch it into Amharic or Tigrinya, you see they are victors. They are winning their war at all costs. They're winners. They're marching to Addis, and they have defeated fascists. So you can see kind of switching narratives from being victims and
from one language to the other.
Yes,
so depending on addressing the international audience with English. They present themselves as the victims of genocide, victims of massacre, which is, of course, not happening on the ground. But in their own language, either in Tigrinya or in Amharic, they are the victors, militarily defeating the enemy, massacring thousands of Abiy Ahmed soldiers, and so on and so forth.
Yes, so you can see how they kind of manipulate, and one thing that is sad is this will not help to resolve the situation. Like, yes, the Tigrayan civilians, which I have sympathy, are suffering from this really bad group of people that manipulate the public with this kind of disinformation and misinformation. And I think we should emphasize that everybody has deep sympathies for Tigrayan civilians who are suffering from this. And they
Definitely, I agree with you. We have to separate between the ethno-fascist kleptocracy that the TPLF or the Tigray rebels are, and the people. The people are as much victims of the TPLF, if you will, as the rest of the people of Ethiopia. They have been for the past 30 years. Yes. But while we are on the subject of genocide, let's go back to the record of TPLF committing genocide or massacre on civilians that can be categorized as genocide. What is the record in this regard? What's happened in Gambela, in Ogaden, Somali region?
Yes, on TPLF when they were in power, maybe genocide is a strong word, but pogroms, like I saw on my own eyes, people who have suffered in Gambela in 2002 and 2003, that there were people who worked in Gambela who escaped that massacre. Like at least 300 or 400 people were massacred. Anyuas were massacred in Gambela. In Somali region.
And this was targeted ethnic cleansing or attack on ethnic
yes,
group, the Anyuas.
Yes. In Somali, they have been massacring, burning down villages, killing people. I saw people. There are, of course, evidences that
Genocide Watch, the organization, had at that time come out saying that what is happening on the ground, but the TPLF regime is tantamount to genocide.
Yes,
it's on record.
Yes, on the record. In Sidama, in 2005-06, the Sidamas were asking for a statehood, and it was called the Loke massacre. So they did that massacre in Sidama in 2005 and 2006. I remember
Sidama is now a region of southern, formerly in the southern states, yes. But now an independent or a separate kingdom.
Separate state, yes. And in Oromia, I remember I was raised in Oromia. I know when people, for example, when we were in university, in the summer we go back home. And you want to teach students, you need some kind of permission. I have seen some of my own friends were fired from university in 2005 and 2006.
For just teaching, voluntarily teaching the youth.
Yeah, for teaching voluntarily for
like academic courses. Is that what you
academic courses? But for protesting. That it's 300 or 400 students from Addis Ababa University in 2005 or 6 were fired because they protested when the Oromia regional capital was from Finfinne to Adama. So the Oromo students protested that. They fired all those students who protested the capital should not be moved from Addis to Adama, from Finfinne to Adama. And they have
thousands and thousands of young Oromo activists were imprisoned. So much so that the former TPLF leader who was imprisoned, Sia Abraha, now residing in the West, when he came out of prison, he said what? What did he say?
He said the prison speaks Afan Oromo. The prison speaks Afan Oromo.
Ethiopian prisons, that everybody there?
Yes, were Oromos. And I know
the majority of prisoners were Oromo, is what you
Yes, I know most Oromos were killed. I remember my friends were, arrested for saying that, let's have this. Let's us, it's just amazing that things are really kind of changed over the last few years.
So this then is the record of the brutality, the massacres, the genocide of the TPLF regime during its 27 years in power, tyrannical misrule of Ethiopia, and yet all that background, historical context is forgotten. And now the Tigray genocide lie is being promoted, or at least the past year it has been harped upon, and the media kind of, gave it a tacit support, if not outright support of that narrative.
Yes, that was what amazes me. Like, facts might not matter anymore.
Yes. So let's go on quickly to the list of Professor Derese Getachew Kasa, the lies that were deflated or punctured. On number 3, he says Ethiopian forces use chemical weapons, especially white phosphorus in combat. Another outright lie, which was disproved. Number 4, he says TPLF invaded Amhara and Afar regions in order to break the siege. Again, this is borders on the ridiculous. I mean, to break the siege, you invade regional neighboring regions, and then you commit massacres there. Well-known, well-recorded massacres in Afar, in Galikoma, in Chena, in Wollo, Dese, Kombolcha. So all that was done to break the siege.
That is, and the corporate media pick up that narrative. That is what is really sad. Like, you pick up that narrative. They want to break the siege.
Mm-hmm. And then number 5, he says, go on that.
And so that is what really is sad about the current state of media, the current state of journalism, that people are not reporting about the atrocities being committed about Afar and Amhara region. Afar, they are fighting back, that I have seen, and there are a lot of displaced people, a lot of family issues, but the NGOs are not reporting about that.
Indeed, at one time in Galikoma, women and children were massacred by the hundreds, and not much was said about that, except once I think the UNICEF director said something about that. So let's go on the litany of lies. Number 5, TPLF did not recruit, arm, and deploy child soldiers. Again, a blatant lie.
This is a blatant lie, because even the photographer who went to Tigray with one of the lead reporters of this conflict, New York Times reporter.
New York Times reporter Declan Walsh, yeah.
Yes, they took a picture of child soldiers, and they didn't even realize that was a crime, and they put it up on Twitter. And when people started to...
And they called them highly motivated young recruits.
Young recruits.
These were child soldiers, but...
Child soldiers, absolutely.
In a euphemistic way of, glossing over it, they called them highly motivated young recruits.
Young recruits. And the thing is, they didn't even realize I don't know what blinded them. That was a crime. Indeed.
But somehow truth came out, and
people started to take to a campaign, and they pointed out that there are euphemistically described child soldiers.
Child soldiers, which is a war crime. Recruiting child soldiers.
Yes. So
and using them as cannon fodder.
Yes. And you talk about like objectivity, transparency, and neutrality, these virtues of journalism. Like, they tell you about like transparency and journalism and care for facts, care for victims. Where is the care for child soldiers? And
that's one of the tragedy of these wars, is that the TPLF has been recruiting thousands and thousands of child soldiers. And we're talking about 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, children who are not even in high school, 7th, 8th graders. And you see them sometimes captured by Ethiopian troops, and you see them weeping and crying. It is a war crime of the highest degree. Very, very, very tragic. But it seems to be getting away with this kind of criminal behavior. So let's go on number 6. He says, we are reading on Dr. Derese Getachew Kasa's litany of lies. In number 6, he says, Ethiopian Airlines transported troops and military hardware to the war zone, as if this is not allowed. I mean, it is not allowed.
CNN fact checker came on CNN and said it's not a crime.
Yeah, the United States does that. Oftentimes it commandeers United Airlines, other civilian airlines to transport military to Afghanistan or what have you.
I know why they campaign on that, because they want to hurt the regime, Abiy Ahmed, economically. So they started to campaign on Starbucks that you are drinking this coffee that is coming from Ethiopia. That is like campaigning against farmers.
Economic warfare, yeah.
Economic warfare. And that is sad. And there are people who kind of jump in on that kind of campaign.
Exactly. So the Ethiopian Airlines falsehood was also debunked because the bill of lading of the cargo that they presented was obviously forged. In number 7, Dr. Derese Getachew Kasa says, line number 7, TPLF forces are fighting in the outskirts of Addis Ababa. One outlet states that they were 25 kilometers outside of the capital. We have dealt with this, so we're not going to go into that.
Yes.
In number 8, he says media hysteria and PSYOPs, which is psychological warfare, urging US and other diplomatic personnel in Addis Ababa to flee the country ASAP.
Yeah.
This also, we have dealt with it, but a variation of that was to urge even other embassies, African embassies, to abandon.
The sad thing is another African president from Zambia ordered his embassy crew in Addis, and they left, and he posted
to withdraw.
Yeah,
indeed. While nothing was up, Addis Ababa was safe. Neither the United States Embassy, nor the British Embassy, nor the French Embassy were closing and evacuating. And yet this Zambian president, it's a shameful...
it is.
Instead of showing solidarity with Ethiopia
yes.
at this time of critical need, this was kind of backstabbing.
Yes, it is.
In number 9, coaxing and cajoling African countries to do the same. Zambia is a case in point. We've dealt with that. Number 10, showcasing a bunch of nobodies as members of a TPLF-led front to preside over a transition process covered by CNN, Reuters, AFP, etc. This was in Washington, D.C.
That was a funny
the so-called alliance of the opposition of 9 organizations, but very laughable.
No one knows those political parties. I consider myself really a political junkie. I know a lot of Ethiopian politics, and I don't recognize any of those individuals who were on that.
Except one. We know one.
Yes, Brana Crystal. I know Brana Crystal.
Guy,
yes.
Who was former ambassador of the regime when TPLF was in power. He was once ambassador to the United States and then to the European Union around the time when Meles Zenawi died there in Brussels. So out of those 9, you could not recognize anybody as a...
I don't remember. I don't see them. I don't remember seeing them anywhere else. anywhere before that event. And some of them I've heard, I think the Gambella guy was not even officially represented by the party. And they just co-opted him. So they're trying to kind of
form a government in exile and
and they're trying to kind of, so remember,
but it was all a TPLF
yes,
drama.
It's a drama. There was no, even if it is like it is, let's consider it, there is no significant number of Oromo politicians who will be willing to be part of that ploy. I'm sure there will not be like most Oromo opposition politicians, even those are ardent opposition to Dr. Abiy, will not be willing to be part of the drama. No single Amara politician that I know will be willing. In the southern nations, no Somali opposition groups will not be willing because Somalis know how TPLF played them. So it's just funny. And
the fellow who was supposed to be representing Somali party, he was all over the place during the question and answer session of that press conference, in which he says, we'll either remove it by force or by negotiation, we'll dismantle.
Yes, that was
very embarrassing.
Very embarrassing. So
what you intend to do next? Do you have like specific action plans? Like, are you thinking about launching operations towards any particular city in Ethiopia? And do you have any plans beyond that, like in terms of what kind of a political transition you're envisioning?
Okay, maybe Mr. Almasi, you want to answer that? Yeah.
Okay. Also, could you please state your names and the spelling of the names so we're making sure we're quoting everybody accurately?
And the group you're
Yes, please.
The first step we have to take is to sign an agreement with all the fronts, recognizing the problem and the widespread situation and the genocide. And the next step would be to reorganize ourselves and totally dismantle the existing government, either by force or by negotiation, whatever they wish, and then settle transitional government as soon as possible. That's my name is Mahmoud Ugras. I'm from Somali States Force.
Mahmoud, M-A-H-M-O-U-D, in your last name, sir?
Ugras, U-G-A-S.
And sir, you said that you would need to, the aim is to totally dismantle by diplomacy or by force. Could you talk a little bit more about the lengths of force that this group is willing or prepared to launch? What does that mean, force?
Well, by force means if the government doesn't negotiate and accept the offer the international community and the fronts are offering, then we definitely use any kind of force that we can dismantle. And it's already being outrooted from where they were. So there's no federal arm, and the whole community in 110 million is with these groups you see, and things will be smoothly going on. There will not be any force at all.
I'm sorry, you just said there will not be force, or there will be force?
Well, the current situation in Ethiopia is so weak. They don't have federal arms, and the struggle has been going on for the last 1 year, and there's no way they can fight against the front, because 110 million people abused are supporting the group.
I see. So you're saying that the federal forces do not have the strength to take on the force that your groups with 110 million people are prepared to bring. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you
maybe I should compliment. Definitely.
State your name.
My name is Berhane, B-E-R-H-A-N-E. My second name is G-E-B-R-E, then C-H-R-I-S-T-O-S. Berhane Gabrek. Okay. It's okay. I think you can hear me. I'm from Tigray. As you know, the Abiy regime has conducted open door against the Ethiopian peoples. There is war in Tigray, which I don't have to describe. All of you, I'm sure, know how it is going. You know that there is war in Oromia, in Benishangul, in different parts of the country. Country is engulfed with civil war, launched mainly by the Abiy regime. So we all are forced to defend ourselves.
You know, what I've heard is that even there was a concern that experts, the so-called experts, that they don't recognize any of those politicians. That is a really concerning for them.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, the irony of it is that here is a legitimate government in Ethiopia, now led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, which won in a free and fair election that was conducted in June. And yet these guys, thousands of miles away from Addis Ababa, a group of nobodies, dare to form a government in exile, to remove the government by force or by negotiation.
Yeah.
As one.
And the sad thing is, you know what, that saddens me, that the Democrats are people who are in the party, who campaign for voter suppression in this country, who say that there will be John Lewis act of voting rights in the United States, who campaign on that platform, are trying to help a group that suppress Ethiopians' legitimate voice in Ethiopia. And that is really the hypocrisy that I can't stand. You can criticize the Ethiopian election,
Indeed.
but you can't kind of put a shoddy government from DC, and people describe them, they're kind of making fun of these people like Uber drivers and stuff like that. So,
well, nothing wrong with driving Uber and
yes,
earning a living. That's
yes, absolutely. I'm not trying to say that there is a problem with that, but the thing is that people have legitimately voted, and at least you have to wait until at least 5 years to compete in that election. And people have voted. And people who are helping these people, the TPLF, are the ones who are campaigning that there is a voter suppression in the United States. And they do that in the foreign country. That is very sad.
Yes, indeed. And the shame of it, though, since we are talking about media disinformation, none of the media representatives present in that press conference. That press conference, by the way, was covered by Reuters, none other than Reuters, and 38 minutes of that is on YouTube. Viewers
and broadcasted.
But none posed challenging questions, the questions that we are talking about now, to those government in exile, to Birhane ገብረክርስቶስ, essentially. They were left to get away with outright ridiculous nonsense. Number 11, then, to continue, this torrent of lies gave the overwhelming majority of Ethiopians to speak up, organize protests, to vote out Democrats, as happened in the state of Virginia, and stand behind the federal government. So this fact is, of course, not as reported by the Western corporate media. The fact that Ethiopian people are mobilizing inside the country in Ethiopia, in the diaspora, in the United States, Canada, and Europe, turning out in mass to challenge the disinformation and lies, and also to exercise their rights as citizens of these countries. For example, in the United States, Ethiopian, Eritrean voters, citizens with Ethiopia and Eritrea as their original homeland, did turn out en masse in Virginia, over 100,000 voters, and did make a difference, by the way,
yes,
in expressing their their disappointment with the Democrats. And some experts say that election was won by the massive turnout of Ethiopians and Eritreans who voted in bloc against the Democratic candidate. Because the Republican candidate won by a margin of 80,000 votes.
Yeah, that's
that
what
80,000 vote margin came from Ethiopian Americans, Eritrean American voters in that gubernatorial election. Anyway, none of this is given ample fair coverage by the Western mainstream media. In number 12, Professor Derese Getachew Kasa says, all of this did not break our resolve, it augmented it. Okay, number 13, we are sure of one thing, a mountain of lies will not bury the truth. And number 14, then he concludes with, we stand with Ethiopia, which is...
Yes, so the thing is, regardless of your political view about the current government, you can see how unfair the corporate media and the Democratic Party has been in dealing with this conflict. And the way they try to frame this conflict makes Ethiopians really angry with the Democrats and the corporate media. And people I have seen, like, even from my family members, have embraced like extreme views about the Democratic Party. So that is really concerning, and they're not willing. They're so disconnected. They're not willing. They're not trying to reach out to people, and they're trying to go. Now the Secretary of State is traveling in Africa. He is going to Kenya, to Nigeria, and to Senegal.
You were talking about U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Yes,
Blinken, and traveling, trying to co-opt, trying to buy some kind of influence to support their cause. So you can tell that this is really concerning, and that's why people are really disappointed. And people are. I can tell you that the Democrats are so disconnected with the reality.
They are not listening, though. There is a tone deaf to the grievances of Ethiopians, Eritreans, Somalis, overall the Horn of Africa people who are advocating for peace.
Yes, and what concerns me even more is that, for example, if this conflict will settle with negotiated settlement, which I will prefer, that they should also involve the Eritrean government. Without the involvement of Eritrean government, there will not be a lasting peace, because TPLF always has issues with the Eritrean government. I have seen videos, music videos, claiming that even Asmara is ours, rather than a provocative kind of
this expansionist dream of greater Tigray, the secessionist agenda of the TPLF has always been there, as you said.
Yeah. So
annex. Okay. Finally, I would like, in the remaining minutes that we have, to focus on a very important research paper, Dr. Endalk, that came out around May by the New Africa Institute. In particular, its director, Dr. Simon Amare, a young Eritrean American. The paper, about 72 pages, titled Disinformation on Tigray, Manufacturing Consent for a Secessionist War. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Have you read it? What was your impression of that paper? How did you find it?
What impressed me with that paper is the number of footnotes, the evidence that people are. I have seen a report that came after that. They say that they claim the Eritrean government sponsored that, but it's just really ironic that people who don't provide a single footnote for their argument, Dr. Simon has provided overwhelming number of footnotes, evidence, empirically supported. So what is so impressive about that report is that it is solid, it is empirically supported, and the footnote is half of it almost is like a footnote. It's a lot of evidence.
It's verifiable, though. The empirical evidence, as you said, is there. Everything is documented, supported by evidence. He's not making up stuff as he goes in a propagandistic way.
It's not like a corporate
making
media.
it up, yeah.
Yes. And that the other thing that really saddens me are people not trying to even refer to that kind of report, because that is a fact, evidence-based, and people are now willing to kind of refer it because they already misinformed the public or even the scholars. And so it's very interesting that when you support your narrative with evidence, people are scared of narratives with evidence. People prefer some hollow narratives that do not have any kind of evidence. That is what I have seen. And I haven't seen people referring, especially those corporate media journalists, are not willing to refer to that kind of solidly written paper.
So I absolutely agree with you. It's well-researched, well-documented. And the fact of the matter is that this was published back in May.
Yes.
We are now in mid-November. So 6 months after that, the disinformation has in fact multiplied, quadrupled, quintupled by many folds, and I think he should update it and publish it in book format, because it can easily go up to 200 pages with the overwhelming amount of disinformation and lies that we are being faced with. But in that paper, Dr. Endalk, he has a chart in which he outlines the intricate web of lies of the TPLF disinformation network, as he calls it. We will put the graphic up for our viewers. And he identifies 6 stages of this, how the disinformation is manufactured. And I would like us to discuss on that. I'll briefly read up on, the 6 points. Number 1, he says, briefing Western contacts. This is initiated by TPLF from Tigray. So, by way of example, he says, Wondimo Asamno, emailing William Davison and Addis-based correspondence, talking points through the Tigray Friendship Liaison Office, Mulugeta Gabriewat, briefing Alex Dowal. So this is the initial starting point. It comes from within Tigray or, in that area. Then this is amplified by, number 2, developing a pro-TPLF narrative. The Western voices or experts then amplify this and publish it in, say, the websites or other journals or news outlets. In number 3, creating facts on the ground. These are TPLF activists in Tigray and the diaspora, they're cyber activists, sort of harp on, say, either the Aksum massacre or Tigray genocide, hashtag Tigray genocide, or rape stories, horror stories that are manufactured, and they amplify this. Number 4, then, amplifying primary sources. These are TPLF activists in the diaspora spread primary sources on social media in a coordinated campaign with human rights NGOs and journalists. Example, he says Alula Solomon, Omna Tigray, Stop War in Tigray, and TPLF diaspora activists retweeting pro-TPLF primary sources, articles, videos, etc., with Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, and others also participating in this. In number 5, then he says, producing high-level reports. These are conduct an investigation of an alleged crime on the basis of growing reports in the media and publish a high-level report that is impossible to substantiate. Example, Amnesty report on Aksum massacre, ICG International Crisis Group briefs, Bellingcat investigations with that CNN reporter Nemal Bagr, and so on and so forth. In number 6, then, demanding international action. These is Western governments use high-level reports to guide new policy and force action in support of TPLF. Example, pressure on Ethiopia, EU sanctions on Eritrea, and then what we saw, the recent sanctions on Eritrea by the United States government, and bring in Ethiopian issues to the UN Security Council 11 times to pass some kind of resolution for R2P humanitarian intervention. So these are the 6 stages he has outlined neatly, and in that paper, then he gives one example after the other to illustrate the point. So your take on this?
As I said, that is like the network of misinformation and amplification of those voices are properly captured in that report. And I would have loved to see if there was some kind of network analysis, like network analysis in a sense, for example, to capture how the Twitter or social media campaign, because that will illustrate the connection of points from one point to another. And the intensity of
how the vast web is all interconnected is what you're saying.
Yes, and that could be also possibly done with different softwares. That Simon has done a really good job in bringing the narratives, but you can also include that with the technology, how this connection works. You can see how, for example, hashtag Tigray genocide or stop the war narratives, who are the proponents of this hashtag, what is their connection, how they have spread throughout social media, and how the corporate media picked up their story from that. You can kind of illustrate through network analysis that you can show how really connected, super connected this group of people pushing certain kind of narrative. So I think the network, that research could be updated with this included tweets, and will really illustrate how misinformation, disinformation, and how the corporate media played a huge role, really a huge role in spreading misinformation.
Indeed. A case in point, for example, is the Tigray genocide now, as you know, has been debunked by the report of the UN Human Rights Commission, the joint report of UN Human Rights Commission and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission jointly conducted investigation into this. They came out and said nothing of that sort happened. So that is by way of updating. Another is that the Aksum massacre stories of the narrative, the falsehood, was proven to be patently lied. And at each time, once it was proven, the story would change. For example, Amnesty, was it Amnesty or Human Rights? One of them, or both of them actually. Initially, they said that the atrocities that became known under the Aksum massacre, umbrella, was committed on November 28, 29, and 30. But later, it was proven that either November 29 or November 30 was a sacred religious holiday,
Yes.
of the patron saint of Aksum, Saint Mary of Zion.
Yes.
In which Ethiopian television was present there, interviewing the pilgrims. All were saying, well, this year, unfortunately, the turnout was not as massive. Formerly, in previous years, millions of people, pilgrims from all over Ethiopia, would come to, to celebrate this feast. But unfortunately, due to the war situation, the turnout was low. But they never said anything about massacre.
Yes.
So, there are every falsehood or evidence that they presented, the TPLF operatives were turn by turn disproved that nothing of that sort happened. For example, one of the lies was that the Eritrean soldiers came to loot the covenant, the Ark of Covenant, the sacred Ark of Covenant that was supposed to be housed in that church of or the cathedral of Saint Mary of Zion in Aksum. This is outright lie, of course. An administrator of the provisional government of Tigray by the name of Mulu Brahan Haile later came and said, nothing of this sort happened. In fact, there were a few insurgents in the vicinity of Aksum who came and fired upon the Eritrean soldiers. The Eritrean soldiers, of course, fired in returned fire. And that was the only thing that happened, no massacre whatsoever. But here you go, that was amplified by CNN report, the infamous Ne'ma al-Baqir and Bellingcat, they all came up with this Aksum massacre narrative, which is a massacre that never happened. On the other hand, then, you have a real massacre that happened in Maikadra, a town in the Welkite Humara area. No fair reporting on that. It was merely glossed over.
Even in last summer, there was this massacre in Kina, in Gondar. I haven't seen a lot of report about that massacre.
In which I think Amnesty did a recent report on that, yes. Finally.
Amnesty did some report. I think AFP also did some photograph reporting, but it never, it kind of, the news cycle is very funny that I have seen. The news cycle on atrocities that allegedly committed by Ethiopian forces will remain in the news cycle for many days. But the atrocities committed by TPLF, the news cycle kind of die out immediately. And I can support this with my evidence. I have seen report after report.
Mm-hmm. In which, stories like Tigray genocide or Aksum massacre or rape horror stories are allowed to be, resurrected again and again and stay there for perhaps a week or so, whereas other real atrocities like Maikadra or Chena or Galikoma or Wollo, Kombelcha, all these real massacres are just, they quickly die as they...
Yes, that was very funny. I mean, funny in a sense that how things look like really orchestrated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We must point out in this regard to one journalist or photojournalist, Jamal Countess of the Getty Images, who did a good coverage of the Maikadra massacre, and later recently also. The other was the novelist, writer Jeff Pierce.
Yes.
Also did cover that, went to Maikadra and did an elaboration of it, interviewing survivors of that massacre or family members of those victims who died in that massacre. But these are, as far as we know, the few that were there.
Yes, that's true.
By way of wrapping up, then I would give you some concluding remarks, and then we will continue, revisit this at another date, maybe perhaps next week in part 2 or at any moment of your convenience,
Okay.
Dr. Endalk.
Okay. Yes.
Your concluding remarks then to wrap up.
Thank you so much. So this is so deep. I mean, the misinformation, disinformation is so deep, interrelated. It really requires a lot of time and energy to uncover and show the connection. And it also requires a lot of local knowledge. So we've tried our best to give the context and the stories, how they work. But I think it's very important to consider that the corporate media, they have done it during Yugoslavia, in Bosnia. They have done it because that was a shame of journalism. That there are a lot of research that came out of that reporting that journalism has really did a really bad job of reporting.
Deserves, failed miserably, yes.
Yes, so that they have done that. They have done in Rwanda. And they also have done when they talk about...
In Libya, in Iraq.
Yes, so...
Judith Miller, the New York Times reporter in the case of Iraq.
The international journalism departments of or every corporate communication, I think they have, failed miserably. There are multiple factors. There are, of course, people say that linguistic factors. Of course, there is also a racism factor that these faraway people who live in a faraway place and they always kill each other. They're tribalistic kind of. So that is also one variable that I can count out. There is also this, we are poor. We are a, community from periphery. And, whether you report it or not, whether I have seen a lot of reporting, their headline being changed, or factors being replaced, or paragraphs taken out without even recognizing. If you get caught on Twitter, they say that this is edited for simplicity or something. So journalism has literally, in the global south, especially journalism that comes from the corporate media, has exacerbated the problem. And people who are pandering to the white savior mentality, also because there is patterns, the NGOs, journalism, people who are trying to sell and of course build a career out of this also has done it. So it's a very multiple problems. Variables after variables. We can stay the entire day discussing those variables. So there are a lot of multiple variables that contributed for this mess. But I think we also need to have our alternative platform to discuss about this, because we care about truth and we care about humanity, and humanity should be our concern across the board. And I think
in that regard, Professor Endalk, excuse me for interrupting, but what is being done by activists in Ethiopia, although belatedly they're waking up, we must acknowledge the fact that something is being done, right? People are organizing alternative channels of information. So if you can talk about that also.
Yes, so that I have seen a lot of people trying to organize, campaign, try to tell their own side of the story and trying to reach out. And of course, we have seen the election in state of Virginia, in the United States. And of course, in other parts of the world too, they're trying to campaign, and the conflict is complex, and you need to don't simplify this conflict or then deliberately misinform the international public. So there are people who are trying to, and of course, as I said, that relationship, the relationship between the core countries and the periphery countries, that cultural imperialist theorists have theorized in 1980s is still relevant. That is what I've seen, that even though people have said the internet has changed, it has given a lot of people a voice, empowered the people, but the architecture of it, the political economy of it, is still the same. That people who are from global south, who are from periphery, whose voices are muffled, who are repressed. And of course, people are awakened. There are still platforms, and we are trying to kind of fight back and tell our own side of the story.
The subaltern is answering back.
Yes, they're trying.
Indeed.
Yes,
indeed. So in this regard, we have tried to cover a vast territory of disinformation. 1 hour is not enough. We will have to revisit it again and again. But for now, we salute all those who are trying to tell the truth, to debunk the disinformation, whether they're Ethiopians or Eritrean activists or Somali activists from the Horn of Africa, or allies of the truth. We have journalists, for example, like Ann Garrison of the Pacifica News Network here in the United States of America, and others as well. We do have people of conscience, of solidarity, who are standing with the peoples of the Horn of Africa. We are very much inspired by young people like Dr. Simon Tzvamariam, the journalist Hermela Aragawi, Nabiyu, the organizer, activist from Denver, Colorado, all these Eritreans, Ethiopians, of different ethnicity, background, coming together and saying no more. The hashtag no more is now trending rapidly, which is inspiring. It's uplifting, and so with that, I think this is a discussion that we need to revisit. And I'm glad you gave us time, Dr. Endalk Chala, from your busy schedule to engage with us in this very important discourse on the disinformation on the Ethiopian conflict. I promise that we will come back and have another continuing discussion with you. But for now, thank you indeed. Thank you. And this has been Conversations with Horn of Africa TV. I'm your host, Elias Amare. Until next time, salam.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have to rush now.